Taxi, Uber, Lyft drivers of Reddit, what are the most interesting, entertaining, fucked up situations that happened to you during the shift? I used to drive Uber at Fort Myers Beach. I picked up 4 drunk as a skunk middle-aged people and crammed them into my tiny car. I was about to pull into their neighborhood, nice, gated, on the water, and the one guy was like, "I need you to follow that car." And I'm like, whatever, let's see how this plays out. So we start following this random SUV, and I'm like, who is this guy? And they're like, we don't know, but we have 20 minutes of babysitter left, and we aren't wasting it. I reminded them they were on triple rate surcharge, and they literally didn't care. Eventually the car pulled over and everyone shouts at me, "Go, go, go," and we sped off into the night. $100 ride, $20 tip, 5-star review. 100% worth it. Entertaining drunk, otherwise responsible people is a blast. Friend of mine visiting Nick took a taxi back to his hotel late night. Riding in the back he found a small women's clutch purse thing. Inside was the ID of a 19-year-old girl and the business card of a police officer in a town neighboring state. The police officer had the same last name as the girl, so my friend figured the officer was the girl's father and she carried the card in case she ever needed to get herself out of a traffic ticket or something. My friend figures he can leave a voicemail on the officer's business number when he gets back to the hotel, then leave the purse at the hotel front desk for the girl to come pick up, so that is exactly what he does as soon as he gets up to the hotel room. About 3 hours later, now 3 or 4 a.m., he is in a deep sleep when loud knocks on his hotel room door wake him up. It's a bunch of NYPD detectives who want to know all the details of how he found the purse, like where he originally hailed the cab, etc. Turns out the girl was indeed the daughter of the cop on the business card, and she had been missing for a few days. The discovery of her clutch purse was the first sign of her that had popped up. My friend had paid for the cab via credit card and had kept the receipt, so he was able to pass that along to the detectives who, presumably, were able to use that to track down the cab driver and find out any information he could provide. Ultimately, my friend doesn't know what happened. The cops never contacted him again. Not a driver, but was recently a passenger in an Uber. It was a Monday morning, so of course I was a little down and not in the mood to talk too much. The driver starts going on about how beautiful the weather is and starts explaining a good day starts with being positive. She then asked if I would like to see her book. I was a little confused, but I said sure. She starts explaining that she carries this scrapbook with index cards and markers for all of her writers. She said she usually asks them to write some sort of positive message or just tells them they can simply write whatever they want. This book was filled with notes from people where we live, outside of the area, and even from people traveling from outside of the country. Some writing uplifting messages, some writing random funny lines, some drunk scribbling support for our sports teams, just so many different messages from so many random people on different walks in life. Before I got out, I told her how the messages completely turned my Monday around for the better, and I really appreciate what she does. She simply said, if she can bring a smile to someone's face, her day is made. I now always hope that I have the same driver whenever I request an Uber, so I get a chance to continue reading the book of positivity. I matched with a girl on Tinder by accident, and she messaged me saying she liked PBR, which is in one of my pictures. Being awkward and not wanting to waste her time, I just unmatched without saying anything. Around this time I was near the beginning of my brief tenure as an Uber driver, and who the fuck do you think I pick up the very next day? I immediately try to slouch hoping she doesn't recognize me, and after 5 minutes of silence, right when I think I'm in the clear, she says, "Hey, did we match on Tinder?" To which I reply, "I don't think so." Then she says, "Yeah, I messaged you about PBR, and then you unmatched me." And I just let out a feeble kind of "oh, yeah." Then I look down at my GPS, and there's 25 minutes left in this ride. I did not get a tip. I was unemployed at the time. Quit a job due to an abusive, toxic work environment. Had recently graduated a coding bootcamp but wasn't having any luck landing new opportunities. Bills were piling up, and honestly I was losing hope. I'm about to call it a night. Driving drunks around gets tiring when I decide what's one more? Turns out these 3 older women wanted to do some gambling in the next state over and had trouble finding a ride. I said yes, figured I'd just call it a night after. We get talking, turns out one of them is an IT consultant. They decide to pay me basically $100 an hour to hang out till they are done and drive them all home. We ended up connecting. She revised my resume and put me in touch with some references of hers. I ended up making a good buck off the fares alone and also ended up completely turning my life around by landing a dream job with a little bit of help. I wrote her a sincere thank you once I accepted the new offer, and she replied with help others because you can. Not a day goes by where I don't think about how lucky I am. Edit. Thanks for the silver, it's really been a wild ride, I'm glad I can share. Back in the 70s as a student I drove a taxi in the weekends and some evenings nights to earn some extra money. One time, late at night I got a call to pick a guy up at his home. At arrival the guy hops in the back with a sports bag with few rifles sticking out, I could see that in my rear view mirror. He wanted me to drive out of town to some beer road, and in the middle of nowhere, he told me to stop the car on a small road in an area with a lot of trees, hopped out of the car with his bag, came back few minutes later without the bag, and told me to head back to his place and drop him off. He gave me a huge tip, and this is the first time I ever mentioned this happened. Picked up two guys from a hotel. Destination is in the Hollywood Hills. When we're navigating up the winding roads of the hills, one of the guys mentions that he hates going to famous football player's house because he always gets a little carsick. He tells me he knows this player because he plays for the famous player's alma mater and is in town to work out for the NFL draft that year. This house is at the top of a hill with a beautiful view. When we get there, the drafted asks me to wait for a couple minutes and he enters the house. After a while, he gets back in the car and tells me I'm gonna follow 3 other cars to Six Flags. First car is a big black Suburban, followed by 2 luxury German sedans, and here I am with my economy car with an Uber sticker on it. I picked up a guy who either refused to pay a hooker from the night before or didn't know she was a lady of the night. She proceeded to follow us. Finally he gets a call from someone, seemed like it scared him because he told me to bring him back to his place. She followed us back there, I promptly left. Probably should have kicked him out sooner. I drove a taxi in a suburb of Boston for a while in the 80s. One day, a kid in his 20s with a baseball bat hailed me and asked me to take him to a pharmacy nearby. It was the middle of the day, so I assumed he was coming from softball practice. He told me to wait, then he went into the pharmacy and left the bat in the car. A minute or two later, he came running out of the pharmacy with the pharmacist right behind him. Was this guy nuts? What kind of criminal uses a cab as a getaway car? I casually reached back and locked the door just as he reached the cab. He fumbled with the handle, realizing that he left his only defensive weapon inside, and then ran off. I let the pharmacist into the cab, and then the two of us made a slow pursuit of the guy while reporting his location over the radio, no cell phones. Eventually, he was so exhausted that I got out of the cab and held him until the police arrived. I had to testify in court and identify him. Not the sharpest tool in the shed. Drove for Uber for a bit. Once picked up this guy who ended up being a magician. It's 2 a.m. and had to drive him into Manhattan to his apartment. It was weird cause nobody was around. The city was dead quiet for some reason. He sat in the front seat and told me stories the whole ride there. Once there he told me to get out and did a magic trick for me. He made 4 $100 bills turn into $4 bills and gave me it for a tip. Not me, but my mom. She was delivering Uber Eats last winter to some guy a little out of town. The location was a bit odd, but she went with it. Just outside our city on one of the side roads by some train tracks, she parked her car and looked around for any houses. None. There was a train stop nearby, and suddenly my mom noticed a guy waddling through the deep snow towards her. "Are you, random name, calling him Bob, Bob?" He nodded, took the food, and waddled towards the train. Suddenly it starts up and continues down the tracks. This guy deadass ordered Uber Eats while conducting a train. Had a former NFL player live tweet from my backseat that he wanted to punch me in the mouth because I was chewing gum and he could hear it. Never said a word to me. I didn't even realize I was doing it. Maybe be an adult and let someone know next time, instead of threatening them on social media like a little bitch. The folks driving you are people, too. I was the passenger for this one, but I've been fucking mortified ever since, so I'm gonna put it on the internet to make the memory less powerful. So, I had had a miscarriage 5 days earlier, and I was resolutely continuing with my life because not continuing with it would have involved telling people why I needed to take a few days, and I just really didn't want to because I hadn't even disclosed that I was pregnant in the first place. So I was Ubering to work in my numb emotional haze. The driver had this aggressively Christian music playing, which was fine, until one of the songs got really into babies. It was something like, "Baby Jesus is the holiest thing ever, and you've just got to love him, with his little feet and his little face and his innocence and all this pure love in your heart because baby." So I, somewhat frantically cause I'm half a degree away from bawling my eyes out in this Uber, go, "Sorry, can you change the station?" And the driver goes, "Why? I just really need you to change the station. Do you not like Christian music? Please just change the station." So she changes the station and gives me a weird look, and for like 2 seconds I'm taking deep breaths and thinking, okay, this is fine, I can keep it together, I can contain this situation too. Just at one time I gave a ride to a panicked atheist, as far as she's concerned, and then I went ahead and cried my fucking eyes out anyway, while the driver gave me a rather alarmed look, and her perception of the situation probably became that one time I gave a ride to an atheist who might need an exorcism. She didn't ask, so I just stumbled out of the car and went to work with no more words exchanged between us. And then, when I was coming home from work, I got the same driver again. And I got in the car, and she immediately turned the radio off and drove me home in complete silence. Picked a guy up from a strip club around 5 p.m. He had clearly been there for a while and was talkative drunk. He started talking to a friend on his phone and kept saying he couldn't go into detail because he had a lady driver. He told me he was going home and then taking his daughter out to a basketball game because there was an after-game concert she was very excited about. Little did he know, or I know because I was just following the GPS, that he had been routed to her high school. Dude's in a rumpled suit, smells like strip club, and is clearly not sober. He got a resolved look, handed me a few singles, said thanks for the ride boo, and just hitched up his pants like a man embracing his shitty situation. I drove for Uber and Lyft for a short time. There was one situation I will never forget. I was driving downtown DSM and picked up a gentleman who was just getting out of the iCubs game. He was loaded down with Cubs gear, he told me about $400 worth, and was absolutely trashed from drinking all day at the game. The first thing he says when he gets in is, "I know my destination is X, but I need to go to my hotel first to put all this stuff away." I say, "No problem," and he lets me know how appreciative he is and he will make it worth my time. I honestly didn't mind waiting because the ride was still active, so I was still making money. He gets back in the car and we start heading toward his original destination, about 30 minutes away. We get to talking and apparently he is a beverage distributor for a company in California. He is doing some sales in the area and asks me if I like to drink. I told him I do on occasion, to which he replies, "Do you like vodka?" and passes a full bottle of vodka to me in the driver's seat. It was sealed, thank God. He told me it was a new kind of vodka that he was trying to get on the shelves of some local bars because this vodka was originally created by some ISU students. When we arrived at the destination, he thanked me again for going out of my way to drop him off and let me keep the bottle as a tip. Definitely one to remember. I picked up 4 guys wearing neon green tutus. The guy in the front seat looks at me while I'm driving and says, "Don't do drugs." Then proceeds to snort cocaine from some sort of vial. I smiled and said, "Please don't do drugs in my car." Not a driver, but had a mate pull up the handbrake in a moving taxi last week after a big night out. Thought it'd be hilarious to do a runner straight after it came screeching to a stop. Guess who left their iPhone with a special wallet case sitting on the seat? My most memorable would be, I picked up a girl coming home from work. We started talking about my education and what I did before Uber, and it just turned out that her company was looking for my skills. She gave me her card, I shot her my resume, and 2 years later I'm still working for that company and have been promoted to a junior executive LVL. I've never had to drive a Uber since. Not a driver but a pretty frequent Uber Lyft customer. So I was going up to my buddy's house in New Hampshire, and it was 25-minute drive, and me and the driver started talking. I asked him basically this exact question. My Lyft driver said one day late at night he picked up 2 dudes in Boston. They were both pretty drunk or high. One dude is in the front seat and one is the back. The guy up front starts fiddling with something in his pocket. His friend tells him to stop and just wait nervously. The dude in the front seat proceeds to pull out some cocaine and a credit card and proceeds to do it on the dashboard. The driver looks over and freaks out and tells him to put away his stuff or he kicks them out of the car. He puts it away, the dudes get dropped off, and the driver proceeds to call Lyft support. He basically says the did coke off my dashboard don't accept his credit card anymore. Bonus story. While going to work I asked another driver this question. The driver said a bunch of guys were having a bachelor party. They were super cool and excited. Hitting the strip club and the bars, and they already pre-gamed. These bros were such bros that they straight up invited the driver to party with them. The driver said okay. He partied with them all night long after closing the app, and I think he might be friends with some of them now. He said he had an awesome time, and so did the guy who was gonna get married. He bought them all around and they had an awesome time. Not me, but my cousin drives Uber. He often tells stories about creepy sick strange passengers on every family gathering, so there is quite a lot, but not that much interesting, except those three. He dropped a guy, dressed up to the nines, with bouquet of roses at his fiancée's address. She was really surprised when he broke up the engagement very next day. As an added level of whathifickery, it came out around week later that my cousin was the side guy. Their engagement was done in front of her parents too. He also had replaced the back seat and half of carpeting because woman broke water and started to deliver a baby while he was driving her to the hospital with her husband. They were going there to induce the labor as it was past term. He laughs that he shook the baby out of her. Fun fact. Uber does not cover replacing destroyed interior parts in my country, and insurance also said no, so he had to pay out of his pocket. He also failed police drug sting operation. He was asked to drive a bag to location. He immediately thought it was way too fishy and pulled up to the nearest police station, and lo and behold, totem bag full of plastic string bags with white powder and a tracker. He sometimes delivers things like clothes in a bag to the gym or groceries, but the guy weirded him out. I was driving on Halloween in a relatively small coastal city and had to pick up a couple from a local hotel. The woman was dressed in a long button-down jacket that was tightly closed, fishnet pantyhose, and stilettos. Dude was dressed in sweatpants and was also in a buttoned-up long coat, but I could see something black and shiny around both of his wrists and at his collar. It was around 76 degrees out, so I knew they weren't dressed for the weather. I thought, okay, maybe just a weird Halloween couple's costume, it's fine. I picked them up and made small talk as I drove them to an industrial complex in a small community just outside of the city. They were traveling here from Florida and just meeting up with some friends for a Halloween party. Only thing super weird about them so far was their clothing choices. We pull up to the drop-off location, and it's a small strip mall with DRS offices and small businesses, but at the end, there's a door with a bright red heart symbol with a devil's tail. I then noticed the other people getting out of cars and walking up. Most of the women were dressed as slutty nuns, teachers, librarians, pretty much every fetish you can name. Some of the men were in leather assless chaps, a gimp suit, and one dude was already stripping buck naked in the parking lot. The couple grinned at me, tossed me a $20 tip, and pretty much ran in the building. 99% certain dude was wearing a leather bodysuit and woman wasn't wearing much of anything. That was my first time delivering people to the local swingers club. Now, I pretty much have their schedule memorized and try to be on the other side of town when the events end. I think the coolest thing not many people realize about Uber Lyft is you have no hours or set times to work, so when I used to work in a college town, I would often get invited into places or parties, and if I had made enough money or it seemed slow, I would just sign off and see where the night took me. I've seen a few documentaries about girls taking a taxi but forgetting their wallets. This didn't happen to me. A friend of mine drives for Uber and picked up a girl on her way home from a night out. She was in the back seat and he assumed she was sleeping. Turns out she had overdosed and died whilst he was driving her home. Super depressing. I have several. The first that comes to mind was the 78-year-old lady that insisted that I needed to know about the hookup she was going home from. She went into descriptive detail about her sexual life. When she realized that I wasn't into that conversation, she decided that talking about Trump was the next best thing. The other was a guy that I picked up at about 5 p.m. on a Wednesday. This dude was probably the most drunk person I have ever met. He kept calling me smart guy and asking me if I spoke French and German. When I told him no, he insisted that I did and called me a liar. I had to ask him if he wanted to take the tollway, and he said it was up to me since I was the smart guy. I ended up taking the tollway, and he yelled at me asking why I went that way. I ended up basically giving him two options. Get out of the car on the tollway or shut the fuck up. When I dropped him off, it took him 10 minutes to get out of the car. His house was right before a cul-de-sac, so when I came back around he was standing in the road so I couldn't pass. Dude was a psycho. Probably not what you wanted to read, but I've read a book of a taxi driver full of stories like this. One was a couple directing the driver deeper and deeper into the woods, then down a side road close to the Autobahn, at which point he initiated his silent alarm. There the couple found what they were looking for. A small cross with burned-out candles around. It was where they had lost their infant daughter in a car crash on the Autobahn next to it. Driver reverted his alarm while they put up new candles. This is a long one. I was working late one night and this was my last ride for the night. I pick up a lady at a popular club in my city and she's flirting with this guy in front of my car. They both get in and instantly they are all over each other, which makes me extremely uncomfortable. About 10 minutes into the 30-minute ride, the lady starts telling the guy that she can't go home with him tonight because we're on our way to pick up her daughter from her baby daddy's apartment. The guy gets mad, mind you, both him and the lady are both drunk, and starts getting angry with the lady, to which the lady replies, "My baby daddy's a cop, he has a gun, he might shoot you in the Uber driver if he sees you in the car with me what?" I start freaking out here, instantly regretting my decision to accept their ride request. When we start getting closer to the destination, the guy starts begging me to stop by a corner store to use the restroom. I tell him no, because Uber drivers can't make stops unless it's put in the app, and he throws me $15 to go take him to a gas station. I ended up stopping by a corner store because honestly I was scared that he was going to get violent with me if I didn't. He goes in and the minute he gets out of my car, the lady tells me okay, when he gets back in the car, you're gonna say that I called my baby daddy and that you heard him say that he, the other guy in the car, can't ride back home with me. I was so utterly confused here, I didn't even say anything, but she took that as me agreeing to her bullshit story. He comes back in the car with some food and a beer, they left the trash in the car, fucking assholes, and then the lady tells her made-up story about how they can't ride back home together, and he gets pissed and says whatever, I'm not getting out of this car. At this point, I am extremely pissed off because it was late at night and this was my last ride. We get to the apartment, she gets out of the car, and he asks me if I can take him home. Since I already know that he's not gonna get out of the car, I tell him that he has to put in a request in the app, which he does. Turns out he lives all the way across town 45 minutes away. I rushed across town, all while this guy is drunk, telling me all the bar fights he's ever been in and complaining about the lady we just dropped off. We finally get to his destination, which ended up being a bar, and he invited me in for a free drink. I said hell no because I didn't want to see this dude ever again in my life. It was by far my most annoying interesting ride I've ever been involved in, but I ended up making $60 in about the 1.5 hours the two rides took me. TLDR. Baby daddy drama, a lot of it. Uber passenger here, not driver, but in my literal first ever Uber, the driver told me she got in an accident 2 days prior. And followed that story with 2 accidents in 2 weeks, why do I still have this job? Then laughed and laughed. Yeah, I definitely felt safe. Another driver went 30 over the limit everywhere he went, dude was going full speed racer, and I felt like that we're going over that cliff. Gweg guy from the show. Lastly, I had one driver that kept asking me if I've ever done cocaine, and when I said no and have no plans on it, he told me I was wasting my life away being the loser at the parties that just sits there doing nothing while everyone goes wild. Okay, buddy, lol. I have been in 6 Ubers and have 3 stories. Really says a lot. Happened to a friend of mine, he's not a Uber or a taxi driver, but he was a security guard doing patrol driving. The way his car was stickered up could easily confuse somebody into thinking it was a taxi, especially at night. So this one evening he's driving from one job to another for his patrol. He pulls up at a set of traffic lights next to some nightclub. All of a sudden this drunk guy and his GF get into the back and give him an address to drive to. My mate explains to the guy that he's not a security guard and not a taxi driver. The dude gets confused for a second, then starts laughing, thinking my friend is joking around with him, and repeats the address where they want to go. My friend decides to make the best of the situation when he realizes the guy's house is only a few streets away from where he has to go for his next patrol job anyway, so he drives off, drops the guy and his GF at their destination, and when the guy asks the price, my friend says $150. No hesitations, the guy hands over the money and leaves. Haha, a regular taxi would have only cost like $30 or $40. He was so blind drunk he didn't realize my mate was ripping him off. A friend of mine was a Postmates delivery driver and had a Wendy's order. He said it was to an apartment building, and when he reached the room he kept knocking, but there was no answer. He heard ambulance sirens and screeching tires and people yelling. Paramedics came up to the floor and were yelling at him to see if she was still alive. Turns out the girl had OD'd. Not the driver, my uncle is, but he had Chris Evans sit in the car with him, and my uncle never realized until he saw Chris on the big screen. Everybody who was under 30 in the house was surprised and angry he didn't take a picture. Drove Lyft for about a month a few years back and hated it. Had a pickup near the Flatiron building for a woman. Get to the location and she's nowhere to be found. Calls me and tells me that she's on her way. A few minutes later, she shows up with some guy. Says she'll be right with me. They're both obviously hammered and start making out right outside the car. I don't get much of a look at her, but she's petite and blonde with a pixie haircut. She gets in the car and it turns out she's going to Hoboken. Asks me to turn on the radio to a top 40 station. She starts singing along. We end up chatting. She's really excited about the new Taylor Swift album that's coming out any day now. We keep talking and it's friendly and a little flirty. She leans forward and starts ruffling my hair with her hands. At some point, she sits back and we stop talking. The music is still playing. I start to hear her making quiet moaning noises. Look in the rearview mirror and it turns out that she's definitely pleasuring herself. This goes on for a long time. At no point during it does she acknowledge my presence in any way. After we get to Hoboken, she becomes a little talkative again. Tells me that she wants me to drop her off at a nearby bar instead of where she lives. When we arrive at the bar, she hops out of the car without saying anything, and I watch her go inside. On Mobile, sorry for the shitty formatting, I usually do the late night because that's when I feel the passengers are little looser in personality. I picked up this woman from a bar. She is obviously too drunk to stand on her own. So a man who she was all over helped her get into my backseat and sent me on my way. In my head, I was thinking he's gonna get a second date. I noticed that her destination was 45 minutes away from where I picked her up. So my assumption that it was a work outing or whatever. Next thing I know her phone rings, she picks up and says, "Hey honey. The Uber is bringing me home." Hangs up and says to me, "Man, my husband is so annoying asking why I'm out so late." Turns out she was having an affair with the previous guy that helped her in my back seat. But that's not the crazy part. She starts complaining she has to pee. I told her I can't pull over for her to pee since we are on a highway. She starts crying and begging, and I finally give in because I didn't want piss in my car. So I pull over, she gets out and starts peeing. Next thing I know the door opens, she still has her pants down to her ankles and just climbs back into my car and falls asleep. At this point I'm freaking out because she can blame me for anything at this point. So we are 10 minutes from her house and she wakes up finally. She realizes the state she is in and immediately apologizes to me. But before she pulls up her pants she says to me, "You like what you saw?" And pulled her pants up and went to her husband. I got 5 stars and a $5 tip for that. I got a call to pick a dude up from a bar in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where everybody is super drunk. I get there, he doesn't show. I get a call from his cell by these girls, who say they have him and he is over on a bridge, going around the block. So I pick him up at the side of the road in the middle of a bridge, and the girls just dump him in my car and leave. He tells me to take him home, but there is no address. Head for the airport, he says. So I head south towards the Milwaukee airport. He meant the airport out in Waukesha, about 20 minutes west of Milwaukee. So I was pretty far out of my way when he gets his shit together enough to punch in the address. We eventually get out to his place, which was an apartment above an old bottling factory or something. Very dark, isolated, and weird. He gets out and stumbles towards the fire escape on the side of the building. As I did with every passenger, I checked the back seat to see if he'd left anything. I had previously found drugs, candy, food wrappers, a box cutter with no blades, and money, but in his case he had left his wallet. So I grabbed it and went out to give it to him, since he wasn't very far at that point, as he could barely walk. I asked him if he needed help getting into his apartment, and he said yes. So I gave him his wallet and then put his arm over my shoulder and my arm around his back to help support his walk. He immediately cinched his arm around my neck in a headlock. I'm not sure what the intent was, but I was suddenly feeling like I was in trouble because he was strong and my neck was starting to pop and crack. So I did a little judo, see username, by throwing my arm, the one around his back, over his shoulder, the arm around my neck, and cranking it down. Just a little shoulder lock, nothing wild. I took a big step in and hip checked him, which knocked him down since he was hunched over, drunk, and off balance. I then heard a button snap and saw that he was trying to do something in his pocket, so I backed up and put my hand on the CCW I most certainly was not carrying and then yelled at him to stop. I was a military cop prior to this, so that training sort of took over at that point. I never actually drew my weapon, but he sure thought I did by the way I was yelling at him until I got back in my car and got the fuck out of there. That was actually my last fare as an Uber driver because I thought it was bullshit to be putting myself in situations like that for shit pay while Uber says you aren't allowed to carry protection with you. If something were to have happened, I probably would have been screwed. They don't pay you enough to deal with that sort of stuff. The last Uber rider I ever picked up was a teenage kid, maybe 16-ish, and what I would assume was his girlfriend. They got in the backseat and after a few minutes started to hear some unsettling sounds. Look back and she is straight up blowing him in my backseat. It was like 3 in the afternoon and I picked them up from the mall. Who does that? I deliver for Uber Eats. I have a ton of stories, but here's one of my favorites. One night I went to Hooters for my third pickup there that day. When I walked in, the customer I had just delivered to was sitting over at the bar. He recognized me and called me over. He proceeded to chew me the fuck out because his order was wrong. I had no idea since the bartender who packed the food and was supposed to do one final check to make sure it's correct had sealed the bag before handing it to me. I accepted responsibility and apologized profusely to the customer, who also happened to be a cop. The bartender just stood there and watched me get chewed out. She didn't take responsibility, she didn't defend me, and she never brought it up again. I felt so bad that the customer had to drive the 8 miles back late that night that I went straight home after working and wrote him a really long handwritten apology letter. I basically told him that I was still new at Uber and was my fault, and I learned my lesson about not checking the orders myself and that it would never happen again. I also included a check for $15 to cover his troubles and I mailed it to him that night. I never heard back from him until 2 months later when he ordered food again. We kind of joked about the whole thing, and he told me he kept my letter and my check on his refrigerator, hoping he would see me again. He gave me my check back, and now I keep it in my car as one of my 5 other mementos I've acquired during my stint delivering for Uber Eats. I sometimes go back to that Hooters to eat, but only when that particular bartender is working because I know my meal will be much cheaper since she's the only person there I never tip. Former Uber driver here. 1. Sexually harassed at 3 a.m. Threatened to beat his skinny ass. He got out of the car. 2. Bet the passengers 50.00 I could make it to the liquor store before close. I won. 3. Went toe-to-toe with a drunk at 2 a.m. for refusing service to his drunk son. He called me a bitch and I said, "That's cunt to you, sir. Now get the fuck out of my face." Cops took him away. Many more stories, but those are the big 3 that remain in my memory. I used to Uber Lyft in Vermont. Picked up 4 20-something-year-old kids from New York who were visiting Burlington. I drove them back to their Airbnb in Stowe, a little less than an hour away. We are having a great time, doing sing-alongs to David Bowie. I get to Stowe and the GPS is leading me off the main road, then I turn again onto a dirt road and then another dirt road. It's like 11 p.m. and I don't see a single light from a house, a car, or a street light anywhere. I jokingly say, "Man, where are you guys taking me?" One guy replies, "This is where we are going to kill you." Mind you, I have a twisted sense of humor and have actually used this as a joke when I first met the woman who is now my wife, but I immediately followed it up with joking and laughter. I share this with my passengers and another one replies, "Well, we really are just going to skin you alive." At this point, I ask them to please stop messing with me and that the joke is lost at this point. I kid you not, someone replies, "Don't worry, we'll make sure we put olive oil all over your skin so it doesn't dry out." Finally we get to the location and they invite me in for a beer. I decline. In fact, I declined to pull in the driveway. As they were getting out of the car, someone dropped their jewel in the car and needed help finding that. No chance in hell I was going to help them find it, as I wanted to be ready to bolt at a moment's notice, and I wasn't going to put myself in any vulnerable situations. I went home after that one. I'm a pretty big guy, so it takes a lot for me to feel unsafe, but this was one time where I was absolutely terrified being an Uber driver. Not a driver, but a passenger, like every single day, so I've got plenty of stories, but only a few stand out. 1. I thought it was slightly scary when a very clearly high off his damn horse picked me up one day, but I'm like whatever's cause he was super close and I was in a hurry. Anyways, he said he needed to make a pit stop and it was just around the corner. I didn't really want to mess with a high person, so I agreed and we went on our merry way. It took like 30 minutes to get there, and all in all it ended up being a full-blown drug deal in a neighborhood that was filled with people who looked like they wanted to shoot and/or stab each other at any moment. I was late for work that day, but didn't even complain and stayed quiet the whole time. I was so scared. One guy was eating fried chicken while dealing too, so that was cool. 2. Another that happened to me. Now, I'm white, like whiter than white, but my skin color gets me mistaken for being Middle Eastern a lot, especially by Middle Eastern Uber drivers, and for some reason, my name as well. This is relevant to my drive. Anyways, this driver was complimenting me from the start, telling me how beautiful my Middle Eastern beauty was and all that jazz. I was being polite and thanking him, but then it got uncomfortable when he started putting his hand on my knee. In no way was I wearing any type of revealing clothes. I usually, not anymore after this incident, sat in the front seat, but my mistake this time. More compliments and hand getting higher and higher. By mid-thigh, I told him I put in the wrong address and to please pull over and we were here. He stopped and I got out and walked the rest of the way, which took a good hour and a half but was worth it. I complained to Uber. I guess he got a lot of negative reviews and stars and was fired, and I was given my money back. It was really scary. Picked up these 4 women celebrating their friend's divorce. They were all dressed in nice dresses and gowns, good makeup, jewelry, perfume, and were all very attractive women. One sits up front with me explaining how much a pose her friend's ex-husband was, and said friend goes into how her husband was never around, never fucked her, never took her out, etc. It delved into them giving me advice about how to treat a woman, how to approach them, how to maintain a relationship, all things I believe I do very well so far. It was very wholesome. In between all this they would compliment me on my looks and that I was a fun guy, which was great for my self-esteem. Front friend starts asking very personal questions which I entertained. What's my ideal woman? How many women have I been with? Do I want kids? Favorite sex positions? Stuff like that. I have fun with it and she loved it. She then asked if I'm an ass or tit guy. I'm an ass man BTW. I say I love all the parts of a woman that takes care of herself. Front friend follows this up asking my opinion on her tits because she feels she should get implants. This then chains off to all the women in my car asking me about their breasts. Front friend request I pull over so they can show me their tits and get my honest uncut opinion. I tell them that from what I see in their dresses that they all have phenomenal bodies. They don't like that answer, and so I pull over and all 4 women proceed to show me their boobs, all which were incredible, if I must say. Divorced friend asked me to touch hers, which were implants, to see if they felt real. I strongly advised that I can't do that because there's no telling what trouble can come from that while I'm on the clock for Uber. She understands. So I get to the destination and drop them off. Front friend comes back to ask if I'd like to join them, but me being in sweatpants and an Overwatch hoodie, I don't quite fit the dress code of a nightclub. She thanks me again and gives me $10 with her number written on it. I drove for Uber in Flagstaff, Arizona for drunk college kids. I never had anybody puke. I had a girl pee herself though. She said she had to go, her sister was with her. I asked if she wanted me to pull over, her sister said no. She got out in the middle of the street and peed, but wet herself too. The fucked up thing was that she was only like 200 feet from her hotel. I charged her the $150 cleaning fee. I bet next time she goes out she pees before she leaves the bar. Ha. I'm not the driver, but a drive told me this story once. This guy called an Uber, asked the guy just to drive. He lied in the back seat, eventually asked him to drive him to Santos, a beach near Sao Paulo. I'm Brazilian. He drove around there for a while, they stopped for some coconut water, and the guy eventually paid for the gas because the tank was emptying. Guy was just sad because he broke up with his girlfriend and wanted to get out of his house. The fare was around 1,200 reais. Not a driver but a passenger. My family and I were on vacation in Chicago and had to make an 11 p.m. flight at O'Hare. Sounds easy, right? I wish it had been. We were late because we'd been sightseeing. The train was delayed due to construction, so we went back to the street to find a Uber Lyft XL, 4 people 4+ suitcases. I was the one with the account, but I wasn't having luck because my signal kept bouncing, getting lost between the skyscrapers. Imagine our luck when we saw an empty cab waiting for the light. Not. Long story short. It was a gypsy cab. Guy tried to weasel out of using his meter but was outshouted by my dad, and guy had to stop and get gas on the way to the airport. At least he turned off the meter for that. Got to the airport like half an hour or so before our flight's departure. I signaled my sister out of the cab and we started unloading our shit like professionals who'd done this before. I was afraid that if our parents couldn't pay, the guy had said his credit machine worked until we got to the airport, so our parents were trying to dig out their cash, he'd try to take off with our luggage and sell it or whatever. We had missed the absolute last-minute check-in for our flight by 5 minutes. If it weren't for his needing gas, well, we still wouldn't have made it. The security line was almost at the check-in counter. Ended up having to transfer to a 6 a.m. flight the next day and sleeping at the airport hotel. It's been quite a few years since I drove a taxi, but there is a surprising amount of oral sex happening in cabs. Was driving after work making some extra cash. 1p to 12 a shift, go log into Uber and get a hit right by me. I cruise over there, and it's a strip center with a couple bars and a swingers club. Talking hot tub rooms, bondage rooms, shit like that. So I called the dude who ordered the Uber and asked where he was, and sure as shit he's at the swingers bar. I pull up and the dude is like 6'10", and his buddy is like 4'9". The three girls who look all the same, schoolgirl dress, glasses, hair, tits, everything. He hops up front with me and the other four hop in the back. We start driving and he puts on his music and is bullshitting with me. I look up in the mirror and the dude has his head between one of the chick's legs and another chick is sucking him off. At this point I'm like, what in the every loving fuck is going on? Look over at homeboy next to me and he's smiling and nodding his head, hands me a couple $100, so whatever, fuck it, not my car. Crazy ass ex car, so I keep on driving and I look again and I swear I thought I saw the dude bobbing his head up and down between the chick's legs. We do this for 15 mins and finally pull up to a stoplight and I turn and look and sure as shit, there are a total of 6 dicks in this car. Mine, the dude up front, the dude in the back with the girls, and every single one of these chicks have a dick. And there is a huge fucking suck fest going on in the back of my car. At this point it's like a bunch of pythons fucking in my back seat. I look over at the dude up front and he's got a fucking full-on tent going on. And just smiling and nodding. We pull up to his house about 10 minutes later and he looked me dead in the eyes and said, wanna come upstairs and do some blow and get your dick sucked. And that's the time I got my dick sucked by 3 trannies while Master and Blaster snort coke and watch. Not a driver, but went to law for E3 3 years ago and me and my friend orders an Uber to go to an after party. Jumps in and guy has all sorts of things in his car, telling us to take the water, it was free, and candy, etc, etc. Anyways, finds out that we are British and my friend at the time was little down on the lady luck, so he excitedly says, hoping to meet a girl out here in law. The Uber driver then decides to plan our whole night for us so my friend can get in law girl. Told him due to the English accent to pretend to be a star on a TV show, but a British one, so they don't know it, etc. The guy's such a charismatic and entertaining dude that I hope managed to flee Uber driving and take on acting or something. Top notch, and promptly received 5 and a big tip for the night. Guy's face lit up and gave us his phone number to phone him to pick us back up out with Uber. Free ride home. Unfortunately, our drunken selves forgot this and ended up getting another Uber back to the hotel. Obligatory, not me but my stepfather. My stepfather has been doing Uber as full-time job for over 2 years now. About a month ago he got a trip to Austin. Note that we live in Houston, so the trip is about 3 hours long. He picks up 2 men who were carrying some suitcases. He starts the trip and it's all calm and good until he arrives to the location where he was supposed to drop the men off. See, he told me that the place were some warehouses, but when he arrived the place was full of cops and these cars parked and arresting some people. One of the men tells him to end the trip and keep going. They stop at a Walmart where the men told my stepdad to give them a ride to the place where he picked them up initially and they would pay him in cash. When they arrive, my stepdad drops them off before one of the men tells my stepdad that he saved their lives that day. I'm a driver myself, but just yesterday I heard a story from a passenger that was pretty great. He's in Tampa on business and he and his boss get into an Uber on the way to some business meeting. He says dude, his Uber driver seems kinda shady, but it's Tampa, so he guesses it's just normal. As they get on the freeway the driver sideswipes this lady and they have to pull off in what is assumed to be exchanging of info or whatever they have to do after an accident happens. He just sees the driver talking to this lady for maybe 30 seconds, and then the driver gets back in the car and speeds off. They're thinking that was really fast for an exchange of insurance information after a fairly significant collision when in the rear-view mirror, they see cop lights flashing and the car they sideswiped, also chasing them down. The driver lets out an exasperated sigh and pulls over again. He starts yelling at the passengers, being like, "You canceled the ride. Get out of my car." He gets out and has to start talking to the cop. The guys now come to then realization that they're not making their meeting and the whole situation is fucked, and they start laughing about the absurdity of it all when all of a sudden they look over and the lady who got sideswiped is now out on the side of the freeway in the rain in a house shirt and a shower cap over her hair, screaming at them. She's calling them fucking assholes and other names, and they're just like, "Hey, sorry lady, we're just passengers in an Uber." Her tone changes and she warms up a bit. She thought they were making fun of her and they were friends with the Uber driver. Then they look over and see that said driver is now being arrested. They're on the side of the freeway in the rain with no way to get to their meeting or to even call another Uber because they can't set a pickup location in the freeway. They ask the officer if he can at least take them to the next exit, and the cop is like, "It's not my problem. Figure it out. I'm late for court." They end up getting a ride from the lady who got hit to the nearest gas station. Moral of the story is don't go to Florida, I guess. I was once making small talk with my Lyft driver and asked him if he ever had a weird experiences as a driver. He got all excited and starts telling me in great detail how he fingered a girl. It was so extreme that it was a little disturbing. Not as a driver. I used to work at rock metal concerts and one day I was in a hurry, so I took a cab. I told the driver about my destination and he started to tell me about a weird experiment SB did with water and music genres. While the other genres had a good influence on the water, rock metal broke the water's texture, and for him it's the evidence that rock metal will kill me someday. Drove a gay couple one time who asked me to drop them off on the way to their house when the guy asked me to let them out in the middle of the road because his partner found out and was waiting for them. His partner was actually following my car, which was alarming at best.